Hello, lovely people. I'm really, really excited about this masterclass today because the topic of grief is something that has been something that I've experienced for a very, very long time in a lot of things, and it's something very, very close to my heart. Um, I lost my best friend 12 years ago, and it was the most devastating thing that I could possibly experience. And I feel like I've made it my life's passion and journey to really find a way that can truly help others um, move past their grief, because I consider the word grief and grief to be the emotional pain that comes with loss. So obviously we're not diminishing the loss when we speak about wanting to move past grief. We just don't want to be feeling that intense emotion all the time. And so, you might be experiencing grief as something that's basically taking a lot of physical toll on your body. Does this feel like you? Is that something that genuinely feels like you feel a heaviness, you feel lack of motivation, you might be sleeping badly, you might have lost your appetite? There's so many things that can happen when we're grieving that we we actually might not notice until we have a big grief, as it were, when we maybe lose a person in our life. But so this masterclass, and I want to express in this session, is that loss isn't always just about the person. I think this is a really interesting concept to understand um, at the beginning. And also, so I want to also mention that if you wait until the end of the session, I've got some exciting news about sort of next steps as well. So if you're wanting to listen, I'll be talking about that later on. But so if we're thinking about grief and we're thinking about loss, we might think it's just about losing a specific person, because that might highlight for us what's coming up for us. But if we realize that loss is a lot more things than that, and we maybe talk about big grief, little grief, as I like to sort of think of it, it's not obviously straightforward as that. It depends on the concepts of how people feel about things. There might be something that really small happened that you might emotionally feel very big happen to you, which is absolutely fine. So I'm not diminishing any of that. What I'm trying to describe is things that we might not think of as grief, that is still a form of emotional loss. So let's say when we might lose a relationship with someone who's still living, or we might move house, we might lose a teddy, a toy, objects, or something might break, and we might go, oh, we might be really upset about that thing. And the problem with this is not the thing that's happened in itself, it's how we deal with it. So if we were never sort of taught through sort of our belief systems and as we were growing up how to deal with these little bits of grief over time, they can basically compound, and we can actually be living in a bit of limbo, maybe, that sort of doesn't really give us a way through that really helps us deal with things on a day-to-day basis, or even it kind of makes living everyday life really, really hard. And the thing that the thing that I found fascinating about all this stuff since, 12 years ago, since my friend died and everything in between, is that it's actually incredibly possible to feel better from this. So there's a lot of people who think that maybe you can't feel better from grief, you shouldn't feel better from grief. They want to own that emotional loss or something like that. And, if you are potentially a person who wants to hang on to that emotional loss, then this isn't for you. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just the process does take an acceptance of the fact that you want to get better. You want to relieve that stress. You don't want to hang on to it. It's not yours. It doesn't belong to you as such. It's not an identity of yours. But some people you might think that it's something you want to keep because it's how you remember that person. So if that's how you truly feel about something, then this isn't for you, and that's absolutely fine. So this is for people who want to kind of move past the emotional heaviness of the grief and loss and emotional loss that they're feeling. And actually, so this emotional loss that you're feeling at the moment, it might even be putting a strain on your current living relationships. It could be putting a strain on your work. It could be putting a strain on how you go through life, what you're doing day to day, how you're enjoying life. Have you kind of given up motivation? Is it really struggling? It might not be so black and white, you might not have given up hope for everything, but there might be just this underlying feeling of maybe a bit of numbness, maybe, or like you don't feel the same way as you used to feel about certain things. And they can say that that goes hand in hand, maybe with feelings of depression. And grief is maybe a bit different to depression itself, but depression can definitely come up potentially for people who are dealing with grieving problems. So it's definitely worth kind of realizing these things that can come up for you. And if you're, you know, if you're really fed up of like feeling this way and you're really not like, you know, if you waited this long to deal with the problems, I know when I was dealing with all this stuff, like when my friend died 12 years ago, my mental health was not in a good way. My physical health was not in a good way. I was at uni, I was in my third year of uni, and I wasn't doing any physical exercise. And I realized that a lot of things I've been struggling with just basically did compound when my friend died. It was a really interesting time. Like, I feel like I'd always kind of lived with loss quite a lot. I know that my dad left when I was a young kid. I mean, my parents were divorced. I mean, he didn't leave, but like, it obviously broke the dynamic of the house. It changed a lot of things. I broke my arm when I was 4 years old. There was a lot of things that were going on, and I didn't make friends easily when I was a kid. I found it very difficult, definitely very difficult to make friends. And every friendship that I did have, or maybe lost over the time, it felt really, really precious to me. So I had this kind of feeling like I was losing people all the time. I went to school and then I moved away, went to uni, felt like I'd lost my friends, and then I found it more difficult to make friends. So there was like a constant state of loss that I was having. And then when my friend died, it was like this overwhelming, more than so than ever, of these feelings of loss that just like absolutely like floored me. And I realized that I actually was never dealing with any of the other losses. Even though they weren't deaths, they were still so important. Like I realized that I never really dealt well with change. And basically, emotional loss is basically change that we've not really processed, we've not really accepted yet. So I noticed that within myself, that like every time I moved house, every time I did something, every time like there was a scenario that where I was supposed to do something slightly different or plans changed last minute, I would just have a meltdown. And it's because I was never taught how to deal with all these changes. I didn't really know, I didn't have the tools, I wasn't equipped well with all this stuff. You know, and we can learn better obviously over time to like deal with this stuff. But I also want to sort of reiterate that like we can also deal with and make the feelings of that emotional loss better for you. We can go through and we can process what has happened, the sort of memories that are sticking in our mind about all these emotional losses that have happened to us. And so it's a really, really interesting process to go through. So I really advocate for it, because if we sort of stay with like not dealing with these emotional losses and they stay within our head, you know, in our brain, and they sort of don't process, they essentially end up stuck there. So what we aim to do is kind of like move it into a place where your brain has sort of processed it and can put it into sort of like subconscious storage when it kind of feels like it's constantly there. So the problem I was suffering with, essentially what I recognized and what I think is such important information that most people maybe don't know about. I think in this day and age, like talk about the nervous system is like becoming more common. So people who maybe are doing yoga, or you know, that they do, there's maybe some mention of like nervous system work, and this is so important, and especially when it comes to like huge emotional loss. Even, I mean, it relates to all emotional losses, but it's even more important, I guess, when it's like something that is so compounded that it's become such an made your life quite impossible to live well on a daily basis. That basically your nervous system's out of whack because it's living with a quite high level of stress every day because of all sorts of reasons, because of all these losses compounded, all these things that might be having an impact on you on a daily basis. So the idea of the work is to kind of work through dealing with these things to kind of give your nervous system a break from all the stress. And obviously, like, you can read up on nervous system work. There's so much more information out there. I think the internet at the moment, like, is crazy, but I honestly, there's more information out there than we can possibly think of, which is both good and bad. I mean, obviously, maybe there's a lot of misinformation out there. You have a lot of people selling you stuff. I know my jobs are, because like I want to give people the information they need, but it's so hard because there's so many other people trying to sell all sorts of things that are getting in the way of like the information that's helpful. And I do believe there's so many different ways to do nervous system work, actually. And I sort of recommend that, like, finding a way that works for you. And I find that this process that we go through is something that, like, intellectually, it's not an intellectual process, but like we talk about it in a way that, like, is very understandable, that relates very heavily to your loss, so that you can actually understand what's happening. It makes sort of intellectual sense, even though we're dealing with an emotional problem. So I like that about this, because there are some things out there in nervous system work that does sort of, some of it doesn't quite make sense to our kind of like selves on a daily basis, maybe. So you might find it more comforting to work with something that maybe sort of grounds you, like grounds you in a sort of sense of like sense. I mean, there's loads of science. There's so much we know now about like the science behind neurology, neuroplasticity, the way that our brains are structured, and we're kind of trying to shift our habits over to something more positive, because essentially we have a negativity bias within ourselves, within humans, within animals, within anything, that basically, like, we fear pain more than we want to move towards senses of pleasure. So we will inherently be kind of more defensive, more those sorts of things generally. So like, I guess we sort of pick up on negative stuff more readily. So this work is really important, because like you might likely have quite a lot of stuff that you've been hanging on to and you don't know why, and it's just sitting there and it's making life heavy, and every time like something else happens, it compounds, it compounds, it compounds. And they say that time heals wounds and grief, and it's like, well, time itself can't, because it's like imagining trying to fix a flat tire with time. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I know that's not interesting metaphor, but time and action helps. And actually, actioning some form of nervous system work that actually helps you work through this process. And it took me ages to find like something that really worked, because I was so interested in finding something that really does work for people, and understanding it myself, because I was so keen to kind of like not just do the work, but actually understand it myself, understand why it affects the brain in a positive way, how it helps you process the memories that are stuck within your mind, and help move past them. Because and again, it's like we've just gone into such bad habits of like telling ourselves off for all sorts of things. So I find it really helpful, and I think I honestly wish, when I was doing grief counseling, when I was receiving grief counseling and therapy and everything, I really wish I'd come across this sooner. I think it could have helped me a fundamentally huge amount. And it does, in some ways that's upsetting, but at the same time, like, I learned a lot since then. So I have no, inherent regrets for it. And obviously, like, doing this work that I've done on myself as well, it's made it so much easier to sort of recognize the changes it's made for me, and be like, right, I want to share this with other people. I'm so keen to share this with others, because it's so horrible to be where you are, not only having lost someone you love, but then having to deal with the emotional side, the heaviness that comes with it. Like, I felt incredibly lost when I lost my friend. I genuinely felt so lost. I felt like I didn't get the support around me that I needed. I didn't have the support of friends, family, that like I felt I really needed. And then I just like have been living forever with these sort of like very frustrating feelings that I never got the support I needed back then. And it kind of left me in this kind of state of like lacking trust, lacking security, lacking safety, lacking, all these things that I've now added to the loss. So instead of like actually focusing on the loss of my friend, my actual losses came from loss of trust and safety, which is interesting. And well, so we, those are things that are incredibly important as well, because they are all losses. They might not be like a sort of a physical loss in the same way, but they're still heavily impactful on our emotions. So it's incredibly important to get this work done for you if that's what you want to do. And again, this is about you being the kind of person who wants to move beyond this emotional loss. Because if someone drags you kicking and screaming to this, and you're resistant to all of it and you don't want to do it, you're not going to take the sort of learning on board, and you're not going to want to do it. And that's fine. That's just where you're at. And that's, I don't think we should ever be told what to do in our lives and things like this. So this is definitely for people who want to sort of move past that emotional heaviness of the loss. We're not talking about forgetting about the person. We're not talking about moving past like the loss itself, like not accepting it happened. It's very much happened, right? This is all about sort of accepting what has happened and finding a better way to live with it, rather than it sort of consuming us. Like, I know I was fully consumed by mine. I barely got through my final year of uni. It happened like right at the end, and it was incredibly difficult for me, and I just felt like I had no one to turn to, no one who understood. And so I think, especially when grieving is such a hard topic for most people to talk about, no one wants to maybe dwell on it and things like this. And also, like, with the counseling and therapy and stuff, like, they say that like just talking about it doesn't really get to the crux. Like, you can talk about it if you want to, but it probably is unlikely to solve some of the deeper emotional pain, mostly because there's other emotional pains in there as well, and that have not been processed. And talking about it will only get so far. I mean, for me, like, talking about it, if you've experienced therapy that you've just been talking about, and it's not been helping, that might be why. Because there is you're not processing the emotions, you're just kind of talking about the thing, and you're talking about the loss, and you're kind of ingraining in your brain the kind of the bad things that have happened. And although I do advocate for talking about it, definitely to an extent, it depends how the loss affected you as well. Because if there's some really, really negative things, and you're just constantly missing that person, constantly wanting them back, then that inherently is going to make it harder, because you're longing for a person. And that's incredibly normal as well. Like, I also want to normalize the fact that, like, if you're longing for a person who's no longer around, then that is a normal part of grief. Absolutely. And it's heartbreaking. Like, I genuinely felt like my heart broke when my friend died, and all I wanted was someone to validate my feelings. I didn't want someone to tell me to get over it. I didn't want someone to just tell me to move on from it. And this is why there's this fine definition and difference between the two things. It's like, we are not moving on from the fact that the person has died. It's not that we're not accepting that it happened. That is so important to know the difference. What we're choosing to do is to move on from the emotional, physical loss. Sorry, the sort of the how we feel about it within us. Because we don't need to, you might think that your physical pain attaches you to that person. Like, that's your way of sort of saying, I miss you and I want to keep you around. And again, if that's where you're at, this isn't for you. This process is for people who want to accept, they've had a loss in their life, but that emotional pain is just too consuming, too overwhelming, and that's something they want to move beyond. And they want to make peace with that, and they want to make peace. And maybe you can then move on to having positive, more better memories of the person. You don't always have to be focusing on how they died in their last moments, things like this, because those can be quite hard. So you know, it's an interesting process. So if you're actually looking to get relief from these things, this is absolute for you. And honestly, I find this fascinating, and I think I'm so grateful to know this information, because I really, really, really want to share it with people. And so this is, you know, if you've got any questions, you know, put them in the comments, put them in the chat, wherever you're in this video. I absolutely want to help people who are dealing with grief, because again, it is such a fundamental problem to my life, that this means so much to me, that this essentially has been my life for as long as I feel like I can remember, you know, like finding ways to overcome what I was dealing with and get to a point where I felt at peace with myself. And so I would absolutely love to offer an initial free consultation to anyone who wants to get in touch. If you can direct message me or add a comment in the chat, sorry, in the comments, that will be probably the best place to do it. And give me, yeah, if you say like yes, just state the word yes. I want you know, that's you know, that's what you want to start changing your life. Like it's such an important process, honestly. And I will explain it in more detail. We can go through it. So I'd be really interested to hear from people who this is affecting, and anyone sort of like based in the UK or Europe would be easier for me to help, for all sorts of other random reasons. But like, yeah, so if you're you know, time-wise, time-based as well, things like that. So if you're in the UK or Europe, yeah, and you're interested in this sort of thing and finding out more about it, then I'll be releasing other videos as well around this topic as well. So like that might be interesting to have a look at, to find more information about it. But essentially, like if you direct message me or put in the comments yes, then I will book a free initial consultation, and we can have a more discussion, see if this is something that you'd like to do, and then we'll go from there. I just heartfelt, you know, grief is horrible. You know, emotional loss is not a pleasant place to be. And, you know, my mission at the moment is to try and help as many people as I can, and work out different ways of doing that as well. So, you know, I really wish you all the peace in the world, and I'm sorry that you've had to come and find this video in the reasons that you've had to find it, but I hope that it can bring you some solace, that there are methods out there that actually can really fundamentally help you, that maybe are not as well known as they should be. They really, like, the knowledge about these sorts of methods is growing over time. And I think like getting the word out there, and like more people practicing this and more people knowing about it, more people being able to share the ways of being able to deal with grief, it would be absolutely amazing. And I think, you know, we're always growing as a society in all sorts of ways. So please go absolutely well. And I can't wait to hear from anyone, from you, who is interested in taking the next steps